And he gave carte blanche permission.
And he trusted us that, like, I had asked him the same question early on, and he said it's kind of like a need to know, if it was to help you persuade maybe another scientist that this might be something worthwhile.
Continue on Alberta 1 East for 19 kilometers.
Well, it's a big conversation. Call you, I'm sure. But it wasn't like he knew we weren't going to publish it as this, expose, Jim Freeman does drugs. He trusted us.
What a physicist does is explore the nature of reality. And I think he was equally curious about his own nature of reality. And so anything that he could learn or experience that was new was welcome to him. In fact, he told me about how he used to experiment in his dreams. He would set up a task where he would have a nail on a wall and he would try to feel it in his dreams and see if he could actually sensibly feel the nail. So he was curious about his mind in the same way that he was curious about all facets of reality. And so I think he was genuinely curious, and he knew that he did not have too much time to live.
Feynman came to call Harlow, Haley, and Berg the three graces after the Greek goddesses who were the daughters of Zeus. They became his spirit gods into a new version of something he'd been doing since he was a kid, finding the edge between conscious and unconscious, or maybe the subconscious. The edge between the mind's automatic functions and the tasks it could accomplish with a little direction, manipulation. What else was the kind of thinking he did as a theoretical physicist, if not setting the mind free to describe things that could not be seen, things that a lesser mind couldn't even imagine? At Esalen, guided by the three graces, Feynman had at least two psychedelic experiences, one with mushrooms and one with LSD.
What I remember that I thought was significant was when Richard was getting off on LSD for the first time. We were watching the water, and the water was moving, and he started saying, "We've got to draw the line somewhere. We've got to draw the line somewhere." And I always remembered that, because to me it meant that once one started entering that unitive state where everything becomes interactive and commingled, there's an arbitrary line that is drawn, that is consensually agreed upon to be the nature of reality. And I thought it was a very significant thing for him to be saying at that time.
Not everything that happened with him was about psychedelics. I mean, we developed a much broader relationship with him. But after the LSD session, I thought it was so funny. He was lying on the same couch staring at a banana for 3 hours. Quiet as could be. I trained him well. He would just turn it. And afterwards I asked him, what was happening? He said, very sincerely, he said, I don't know. I was just looking at the banana.
What the fuck, man?
It's just a banana.
He talked a lot about our being. I think how it came up, I asked him, I said, I know a lot of scientists, and I have to say, you're one of the most well-rounded I've ever met. And he said, well, that may be true, but if it is, it
What the
falls
fuck?
to our lane. And he said that I would have been a very narrow,
Fucking idiot, man.
Physics guy.
The fuck are up
And
with
when
these
in high
truckers
school,
in
she
Canada?
introduced me to art,
Piece
to
of
philosophy,
shit.
to all the humanity. She opened up my heart. She was polite as could be. She was my peer, but knowing other things. He said that's what did it.
Fucking
Deeply
kidding me,
long-term, and
bitch.
he told me a personal tragic story.
He said,
Move the
he
fuck
met her when
over.
she was 16. She was shortly diagnosed
Fucking
with TB. They
idiot.
got married anyway. And he said, we grew up together. He said, now people have this idea that you have to grow up before you get married. Well, we got married and we grew up together. One thing that I would say about him is that he did not believe in an afterlife. And when Arlene died and she would come to him in dreams, he would tell her, go away, go away. And another friend of ours who was
Fucking
there for the
fuckhead.
LSD time, she felt so sad that he felt that way.
Fucking
And he
piece
wrote
of
me a letter,
shit.
Richard wrote me a letter afterwards saying he's so sorry that he made my friend cry because she felt so sad that he did not believe in any kind of ongoing spirituality or any kind of ongoing life with Arlene, even though she had left her body.
The reason that he enjoyed being with us is because we were psychological, and I don't mean clinical or analytical, but because we were insight-oriented. And I think that moved him, especially with regard to things like being able to talk about his grief with Arlene.
We went out to visit him just before his second surgery.
It was simply that he wasn't feeling well, so we thought to bring him out to Mohammed.
In fact, we stopped along the way and we cut fronds from the palm trees growing along the highway, for which the police stopped us, but we ended up being able to make off with the fronds.
I remember standing in the elevator, just keeping a really straight face when we're in this elevator full of people.
And so we were sitting on either side of his bed, fanning him, and the nurse walked in and said, "Oh my goodness, you look like a god with your goddesses." And he enjoyed that. We met his daughter Michelle and his wife, and they were interacting with him before he went into surgery. And it was interesting because there was a marked contrast between the way Barb and I were relating to him, which was very playful and very entertaining and lighthearted.
They seemed a little more reserved than we were, but I think they had known him for enough years. They just sort of took it in stride. They weren't horrified. They were worried about him.
And then the next morning, I thought it was a very normal, ordinary conversation that he was having with his family. They were talking about Zeno's paradox. And it was not emotional. It was not addressing the fact that he may die and they may never see him again. It was a very concrete, rational conversation.
They were respectful that we'd come and really cared. Then he knew there was a caring relationship.
I really
Amazing.
appreciate the sense of respect
Holy
that he
fuck.
showed to me and to us. I mean, he never came on to us sexually, and I really trusted his character, his intention, and his integrity. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing.
Dick showed such deep respect for each of us had a personal relationship with him. He got me at very deep levels. I would say if anything, he maybe was a little bit paternal. He was quite protective. He cared about me as an individual. We talked about my career. We talked about what my goals were, what drove me. I would say that he wasn't a taker. He was a person who gave deeply of himself, shared wisdom he had, he shared his levity.
I would have to agree. We were walking on the property and he was talking about his philosophy of art. I thought he was rather self-indulgent. He said something about art and I said something about farce. And he shot me a very dirty look and I shot him a big-hearted smile. And that's the moment that we bonded. And so I think we were not groupies. I think we gave him some emotional educational training.
I lived in California. I went to New York to visit a friend, and I had just arrived. My friend was in the bathroom, the phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was Richard Feynman. And he asked me if I would go with him, because he was going on this journey where they were going to investigate what happened to the Challenger. And I ended up not doing that whole journey with him, although he did share in great detail with me how, step by step, he investigated the process that came up with that little cheap O-ring that ended up not being replaced when it should have, and was responsible for blowing up the Challenger.
He was calling to talk about what it was like, and as everybody knows at this point, I mean, everyone on that commission for 3 months, they all said, we want to go home, sign off on our paper, and here he says, I won't leave until you all sign my report. And told a wonderful story, I don't know if it's a publicly told story or not, that Rogers really didn't like him, and it was mutual, and that Rogers would send cars to pick him up, take him to meetings, but they'd send him to the wrong place, they'd give the limousine driver the wrong information, so he'd be late for meetings, miss meetings, and he was really sabotaged and thrown under the bush.
He was surprised that there was so much resistance. However, he was vindicated in the end because he did discover the reason, and he even went before Congress and demonstrated why it was the case that that little O-ring was responsible for the whole explosion. And it was also amazing that we got to watch on television together, because I just happened to be down here at that time and everything was live on television, when he dropped the O-ring in front of Congress into the glass of water.
I got a kick out of opening the New York Times all the time. There's Feynman on the front page again.
We heard all about Feynman's work on that presidential commission in the first episode of this series. On live TV, Feynman demonstrated how the failure of those O-rings was the likely cause of the Challenger disaster. To all those who watched, his testimony was an act of courage in the face of government whitewash. To the government, his testimony was more like an act of sabotage. And to Feynman, he was just doing science, using every fold of his brain to try to find evidence for or against the proposition that X indeed caused Y, and if not, what did? Looking back, this may have been a high point for the public opinion of science and scientists, which is a little bit weird since Feynman was using science to explain scientific failure rather than to celebrate a triumph. Still, people believed this scientist on TV and they trusted him. And how about today?
I think the question really isn't about trusting science, it's trusting the people who do science.
That's coming up after the break. I'm Stephen Dubner, and this is Freakonomics Radio. Infidelity. With Fidel, James treated far usually considered, studied physics at Caltech, and stayed friendly with Richard Feynman until Feynman's death.
Near the end of his life, he was like, well, now I'm going to experiment with all kinds of drugs because I'm dying anyway, more or less. I think he was a little embarrassed about that. In the environment at the time, these were illegal drugs and so on. I think he viewed himself as a think for yourself, but nevertheless law-abiding citizen. I don't think he felt that he was having brilliant insights rushing in because he was in some altered state. One of the things he said to me was, if you want to do creative science, peace of mind is an essential feature.
Feynman visited Esalen several times toward the end of his life. People always wanted to know what he was working on, what he was thinking about. So sometimes he would give a talk, less formal than a classroom lecture, but scientific in nature. One of these talks he called Tiny Machines.
I heard people around the bath in tiny suits. what is he talking about machines? I say, very small machines, because I am talking about very small machines. Okay? There wasn't a field called nanotechnology when Dick Feynman was thinking about nanotechnology. Nanotechnology was something nobody talked about. He just was thinking about it and he thought it was interesting. He tried to think through what the implications of that would be.
It was very much the beginning of nanotechnology.
That is John Preskin, the Richard Feynman Professor of Theoretical Physics at Caltech.
He gave a talk in 1959 at Caltech, which was called "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom." And what he meant by that is that there was an opportunity by making our technologies smaller and by making smaller devices to take advantage of the potential to put a lot more devices in a small volume of space. And he recognized that that would be important for computing. He even suggested that we should eventually be able to manipulate atoms one at a time, grab a hold of a single atom.
In 800 meters, keep right to stay on Trans-Canada Highway, Alberta 1 East.
Do what we want with it.
I think some of his best work was actually done in these corners where nobody else had gone and where he just said, well, I wonder how that works.
This idea of a scientist who looks
Keep right to stay on Trans-Canada Highway.
for new corners, who follows his curiosity wherever it leads, who isn't afraid to spend time.
Continue on Alberta 1 East for 6 kilometers.
Afraid to spend time at a hippie retreat exploring the layers of consciousness. That is another aspect of the Feynman archetype that you don't see much of anymore. Science has become more corporate and institutional. It's also an expensive enterprise and competitive. With so much at stake, it can be hard for a scientist to spend time on an intellectual query that might not bear fruit. Along with this decline in pure scientific inquiry, the last several years have also seen a decline in the public's opinion of science. Maybe that's not a coincidence. Here's John Preskin.
I think there has been a surge in skepticism about science and about scientists and their motivation. I don't think scientists should expect people to just believe what they say on the basis of authority. But I think there is an unhealthy level of skepticism about the motives of scientists. A lot of people go into science, and it's not because it's the most lucrative career they can have. They go into it because they want to discover things, and they want to share that knowledge with colleagues and with students and with the world. I think that's a very admirable motivation. And if you're interested in our own glorification or in pursuing a task because it was lucrative, there are other things we could do.
I think what's interesting about that is that even the people who say they don't trust some science, they still want science on their side, right? They don't say, here's my alternative system. They say, here's this other piece of science. I'm Dr. Helen Jarski, and I'm a physicist at University College London. So it's interesting because the authority of science actually isn't questioned. There's no one who's, well, as far as I know, not very many people who are saying actually the world is run by a load of wizards who just wave magic wands and things happen, right?
In 3 kilometers, take exit 89 toward Canadian Rockies Adventure Center.
Some things happen, right? There is a sort of a collective agreement that there is a form of reality that we can understand systematically. I think the question really isn't about trusting science, it's trusting the people who do science.
I mean, I think we're doing everything we can to dismantle the structures that allow science. Lisa Randall, and I'm a physicist, professor at Harvard. You can't have these executive committees or congressional committees that really understand things. I mean, some things are difficult to understand, and not everyone will understand them. And it's really important for science.